Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of ETS Tournament Talk, where me, LightsOutAce, and aReNGee are going to talk about some of the tournament results for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it should be good. We've had three very well attended tournaments. We've had over 32 people every time, so a lot of six rounders. So lots to talk about there.
Yeah, and let's just jump right into it. This last week was dominated by Rakano Warcry and Combre aggro. These two decks have just been everywhere, and Rakano Warcry in particularly has been the most popular and successful deck on the tournament circuit. So, is it just the best deck? Can anything stop Righteous Rakano?
I think Righteous Arcana was a deck that's sort of hitting all the right notes at the moment. A lot of the most popular deck beforehand was, of course, the Stonescar Burn deck, and this is a deck that has a good matchup against that. Unearthly, who is the shall we say the creator of this of the best Righteous Rakano builds at the moment, has come in with a new card. He's playing 4 copies of Finest Hour, which really surprises the Combre opponents. It's something that a lot of players aren't used to playing around right now, and I think is getting the deck a lot of free wins. So I think, again, rather than this being the best deck or a particular breakout hit or anything, it's just people aren't too familiar with the deck yet, and there's a lot of free wins that are coming off of just unfamiliarity. It's the new kid on the block, so to speak.
Yeah, every time a new deck like this comes in and just dominates everything, it people start taking against it and it gets brought back down to size. Stonescar Burn, as you said, was the last boogeyman, and it's taken a huge downturn. Uh, Mostly because it's a very clunky deck fundamentally. It's filled with a lot of 5 drops that don't affect the board too much. Umbran Reaper, Obliterate, Flame Blast. And so these faster decks like Righteous Rakano and Combre aggro can just get up underneath this deck and just really do some damage. Do you think that Stonescar Burn is still a viable deck in a field full of Rakano and Combre?
I think that the general game plan that Stonescar Burn is bringing is sort of a bit more flawed in tournament play. You know, counting up to 25 doesn't work that well when people are ready for you to be counting up to 25 and have a bunch of cards to stop you. You know, people are sideboarding in protects, they're sideboarding in health gain, all kinds of basically hate cards. And Stonescar Burn is finding itself hard pressed to to manipulate its own deck in order to deal with these things while also dealing with its innate weaknesses. Stonescar Burn is, as you said, it relies a lot on high cost cards and it doesn't have a lot of early game interaction. So it finds itself having a lot of trouble against these Combre and Rakano decks that just they start putting on the pressure on turn one.
Yeah, most of the popular decks now do pack a lot of health gain even in the main deck. Like Combre has Combre Healer a lot of times. Righteous Rakano, its namesake card, Righteous Fury, gives lifesteal to a unit and makes it huge, so the lifesteal gains a lot of health. And then like Feln is playing Black Sky Harbinger, gains a bunch of health when it comes into play, and then has lifesteal on a big flyer. It's just very hostile for Stonescar Burn right now. In fact, there were only 2 pilots for Stonescar Burn in this last weekend's tournament, and they went a combined 1-8 in the Swiss rounds.
Well, that's certainly not something that jumps out at you and says that Stonescar Burn is the deck to play. That said, I think people are overhating against it a little bit at the moment, and I think that it's something would pop back. But I think if you want to play Stonescar, a different variant other than Burn is probably preferable for tournament play at the moment.
Getting into the maiden mid range type of deck.
Yeah, something like that, something that goes a little bit more up the curve. If they're going to be bringing all these aggressive cards, unit-based stuff, well, Stonescar Maiden's pretty good against those. Infernal Tyrant's pretty good at stabilizing, and there's a lot of good cards in Stonescar that just you don't have to rely on flame blasting them for 10.
Yeah, you can pretty much make a good Stonescar deck just by taking all of your Shadow and Fire rares and tossing them in a deck with 29 power.
I don't know about that, but it's fairly close.
Yeah, so I kind of want to highlight this Combre aggro deck that Elia K took second place with. There were 8 players who played it, and 2 of them made the top 8. And this is a sort of up and coming deck with new tech. The new 1-drop District Infantry. We haven't seen that before. Where does that tech come from?
Well, we did see District Infantry a bit back in the old Mono Justice decks, but those decks were kind of super carried by just the explosive power of Gilded Glaive on an Aegis unit, and District Infantry served as just an early game unit to push in the damage. For players that aren't familiar with it, it is a 1-cost Justice unit, 1/1 that has Empower, gain +2/+2 for that turn. So it attacks as a 3/3 or better, based on whatever you had on it. And as far as I'm aware, this tech and also this deck's popularity comes from the current #1 player, JPEG, who's been streaming a lot with the list. And I think that his exact main deck was registered by at least 4 players in the tournament, so it's certainly served its popularity, and I believe that that's where the tech comes from.
Yeah,
Elia
and it's
K takes a lot of his lists from JPEG. They pass it back and forth a lot, so I would expect that's where his inspiration came from.
Yeah, and it's a strong deck against everything, not just Stonescar Burn. It can hang really well with Rano with bigger units like Sandstorm Titan and Copper Hull Elite. None of Rano's units naturally pass 3/3 without any weapons on them, so that opens up opportunities for 2-for-1s with Vanquish or Teleport if you're playing that. It has a lot of Aegis, so it is resistant to Feln's removal. And if Shimmer Pack doesn't go too wide and get a Xenon Obelisk out real quick, it can beat down Shimmer Pack too.
Yeah. It's certainly a powerful deck, but it is not without its flaws. It is somewhat vulnerable to its lack of reach. If opponents can get out larger units against it and stop it from being able to attack freely, it sort of loses a lot of its momentum there. It's a very low cost deck, so its high cost cards aren't as impactful as other decks are drawing. And if it gets too much of its board removed and it runs too low on resources, it sort of peters out there. There are control and higher end mid range decks that control it really well, but I think its success at this tournament was sort of field based. Again, everybody, all the control decks are sort of scared of Stonescar Burn and aren't coming out as much. So Combre aggro is free to run rampant over all of these sort of low end mid range to aggro decks.
Yeah, so speaking of control decks, Feln Control continues to be relatively popular, but of the 6 pilots in the last 2 weeks, no one but Sir Rhino has had a winning record with this deck. Is this deck just fundamentally bad and Rhino got lucky? What's up with Feln Control?
Well, Rhino is a pretty good Felon Control pilot. It's definitely his calling card when it comes to ranked, although he is, of course, a draft specialist and very good at that as well. Um, Felon Control is a very difficult deck to build, a very difficult deck to pilot, and you have to be really aware of the metagame as a whole, both while you're playing it, while you're building it, while you're sideboarding, everything. There's a lot of moving pieces. This is probably the premier control deck for people that like control decks, and there's a lot of places to go wrong. The one ofs are this is a deck that plays some one ofs that you need to draw in the right situations. It's got a very sideboard plan, and you need to sideboard effectively. Best of threes are where it can really shine, but it's also where it can really fall apart. Since even if you know how to play the main deck well, you may not know what your role is in the variety of matchups and what cards are good. So I think a lot of it is these players that are playing Felon Control, they may be used to playing it on ladder, but they need a lot more experience playing it in tournaments. Whereas Sir Rhino's been playing Felon Control in tournaments since May. He's had 7 months to be practicing it. So I
Yeah,
think
it's his baby.
yeah, as they get better with sideboarding and playing against these different decks, I think that the deck will improve. And there's always the possibility that Felon Control just sort of had an off day. Rakano Warcry, if they get the correct openings, is pretty good against that. And Combre aggro isn't that great a matchup either, especially if the Felon Control decks haven't been teching for that. So it's likely to me that they ran into a couple bad matchups and weren't able to be very successful given the field.
Yeah, it is a very hard deck to play. You have to be very patient. You have to be really on point with your tech choices. So I'm a huge fan of Felon Control, and my opinion on it is that you can tech it to beat pretty much any 2 matchups, but only 2 matchups at a time. If you run into something besides those 2 that you're aiming for, your interaction just isn't going to line up very well, and you're going to have a really rough time. Like right now, you probably want to aim it at Rakano, but it's hard to know what the other matchup to aim at is. Like there's still a lot of Stonescar out there. There's a lot of Combre out there. There's a lot of other control decks out there, and they all take very, very different answers. And also sideboarding is just really hard. Like you have 90 cards now, and you need to pick 15 of them that are bad in this matchup. And if you pick the wrong mix, that also punishes you really hard.
So sort of
So
A high risk, high reward deck building style, you might say, rather than a gameplay style.
The complete opposite of these aggressive Aegis decks.
Yes.
So let's look at the top 8 here a little bit. So we have a little graphic here that shows the conversion percent, which is of all the people who played this deck in the Swiss, what percentage of them made top 8? And Rakano Warcry is leading the charge at 28.6%, which means slightly better than 1 in 4 Rakano Warcry pilots is making the top 8 of the tournament. That's a pretty impressive rate.
Well, there were a lot of Ricano pilots, but still, putting 25% of them into the top 8 is pretty good when you're talking about, 40-person tournaments. Uh, it's a good number. I wouldn't say it's an egregious number, as the deck is pretty good, and if enough Ricano pilots come in, some of them are going to run hot and go all the way up, right? So I think this is sort of expected for the archetype. Those that run good will get in; those that do not run good will not.
So Combre aggro is another one with a fairly high conversion percent, running above average on the field. So these aggressive decks are really doing well right now. As we mentioned before, Feln control really underperformed. Only one person has made top 8 with the deck. But another one that's kind of on the fringe is these various Shimmer Pack decks, both Elysian Shimmer Pack and Time Primal Justice Shimmer Pack, splashing for different Justice cards. So Shimmer Pack had a couple of top 8s, and then this last weekend, the TPJ version had both of its pilots go 4 and 2 and miss the top 8 on tiebreakers. So although it's not showing up in the top 8, Shimmer Pack is very prevalent and very successful.
Yeah, that means that all the Shimmer Pack players got at least 4 match wins, right? So
Yes.
they're above average on the field for the day, which makes sense. Shimmer Pack is considered to be the top deck at the moment, and a lot of players, well, they're not exactly playing decks that are tech to beat it. There's no card you can slot into Rakano Warcry or Combre aggro that's going to break that matchup wide open.
Yeah, and it's interesting that several players stayed with the stock Elysian Shimmer Pack list, popularized by Finkel, and then a couple more Splash Justice. So there were 2 Justice Shimmer Pack players. They both played Stand Together and Desert Marshal as 3 or 4 ofs, and then Toth 201, our invitational champion, splashed Protect and Seraph in addition, and then Influence, the other TPJ Shimmer Pack player, splashed in Vanquish. So what do you think about those choices?
I think it's interesting. Seraph just adds to the goal of the later the game goes for Shimmer Pack, the better the late game's going to be. Protect, I'm a little bit sketchier on. Stand Together, I see, you want to keep your tokens around, you want to keep them away from sweepers. But if you're planning to win the game by playing a Shimmer Pack, converting a bunch of tokens, and attacking in, I'm not really sure what you're protecting. It could be a sideboard tech where he wants to protect his relics, his obelisks, from relic destruction, which is, not exactly what you normally bring in protect for. Usually you bring it in to protect a large unit from removal. And if that's the case, it makes sense, but I don't think, I'm not sure how prevalent relic destruction was at this tournament, so I don't know if it was needed. As for Vanquish, could be he was expecting the Combre aggro that we were not, and wanted something to deal with all of the large units and take them down.
Yeah, I just kind of like Vanquish in general in this metagame. Like Rakana Warcry, Combre Aggro, Stonescar all have a lot of targets for Vanquish. The Protect, I think, is probably more of a mental thing than anything. I know there's a lot of times where you attack your Stonescar burn opponent down to the point where you're going to be able to kill him next turn. You're at 7 health, they have 7 power. They obviously draw the Flame Blast. You really wanted to protect there.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, it is a multi-purpose card. You can protect a lot of things. He does have the Seraph, so the higher value cards to protect there. So there's he's a lot more. Toth in particular is further away from the Elation style of Shimmer Pack, which makes sense as he was the one to originally popularize it at the Invitational, playing a Fire Time primal variant rather than just the time primal variant that we're familiar with. So he's certainly not unwilling to experiment with the deck, and he's still having a fair amount of success, even if he was just 2% off tiebreakers.
Yeah, so just Shimmer Pack's another thing to keep in mind. Sideboard some stuff that can pop Aegis for value, like Levitate for the Rakano Warcry and the Combre aggro decks. Sideboard some health gain for Stonescar Burn. Sideboard some anti-control stuff for Feln and other various control decks. And pack some Relic Destruction. or in some sweepers for small units. Like Shimmer Pack is out there and it's good. So at this time, we'd like to highlight a really cool deck that made top 8 last week, which is this Stonescar Callus deck played by Jarbo. Now, this is quite a number. It's based around the synergy between all of these little token generators like Assembly Line, Grenadin Drone, Slumbering Stone. And then it has Combust and Devour to sacrifice your guys for value. And then Bloodright Callus, which might actually usurp sort of the Sky King as the biggest relic weapon in the game.
Well, we can certainly check one thing off the list. For those of you that keeping track, this is most certainly Recogulator's top 8 debut. This is the first deck I've ever seen that's won a game with Recogulator in it outside of draft. Never mind top 8ing the tournament. Unfortunately, Jarbo did fall to Elia K in the first round of the top 8, but he went 4-2 and he got there, and there must be something here. Going a little bit deeper into the deck, there is the Torn of Spiders rebuy. You know, you fill you're playing all these tokens, so you fill your void with them, and then Torn of Spiders becomes, 4 spiders, 5 spiders, 6 spiders. And if you follow that up with the Callus, you're going to get a really big weapon. Oblivion Spike is also in the deck as a highly powered relic weapon that combines with all of the random things that you don't mind dying. And then once they've actually crunched through all of those, well, you just smugglers stash all your huge weapons and token generators and do it all again. So it's a grindy deck, grindy strategy. It plays in the same way as Shimmer Pack, where you're spreading out all these tokens and saying, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, this deck is really, really fun. So I've toyed around with this in the past and just hopped on recently and played a little bit. When Torn of Spiders is just an assembly line that makes deadly units, that's pretty absurd. And I even had a game where I went turn 1 Grenadin Drone, turn 2 Grenadin Drone Slumbering Stone, and then turn 3 played a 10-10 Callus and got a little flyer to protect it. Now, that was a pretty fun game.
So interesting things about this list. Besides the Recogulator, I'm gonna bow to Jarbo on this one. He's playing 4 copies of Champion of Chaos, even though it doesn't really synergize with his deck in any way. Is that card just too good not to play in these Stonescar decks?
Yeah, Champion of Chaos is to Stonescar as Sandstorm Titan is to Time. Even if it doesn't fit into your deck strategy, you toss it in there because if your opponent ever can't answer it, it just wins the game by itself. A 3-cost 5/5 Overwhelm Deadly. So even when they block it and trade with it, they take 3 to 4 damage. That just puts on so much pressure so fast that it's hard not to include it just for the free wins factor.
And it's probably a pretty good unit to bring back with Smuggler's Stash, I imagine, if they do happen to answer it the first or second time.
Yeah, it's nice to see Smuggler's Stash getting some play again with traditional armory being sort of on the downswing. Sorry, aReNGee.
Oh well, that's fine. Yeah, even I'm off it at the moment. Its Shimmer Pack matchup is just, I don't think that's salvageable. The other card that I'm looking for in this deck that I'm disappointed isn't in there, even if just for the fun factor, is we don't have any copies of Witching Hour. If you're going to play Witching Hour in any deck, it's got to be in the Torn of Spiders deck, right?
Oh
So,
yeah, it could probably cast Witching Hour by like turn 6 or 7, provided it could get the 6 Shadow Influence though.
yeah, it's possible that heavy Shadow Influence just warps the deck so much that it can't play, the much more reliable Champion of Chaos, and then it doesn't have any double fire cards that I see, but you got to start playing strangers, and at that point you're sort of twisting the deck in a different way. So I understand its exclusion, even if I am sad. Jarbo didn't play in either of the other. He played in the December 10th ETS, but not in the 3rd or the 17th. So we'll see if we get him back in the next tournament with a revised version of this brew. We'll be looking for him going forward.
And maybe we can get some Vara's Favors and Witching Hour in there just to make the crowd happy. So we also want to look at a couple more players who are longtime community members and who've put up excellent results over a long period of time. The first person we want to look at is Unearthly, actually our tournament champion.
Yeah, Unearthly, he's really good. I don't know exactly where he is on ladder at the moment, but he's around the top 10 in there. Usually is always dueling with Finkel and I guess now JPEG for top 3. Um, He has 16 invitational points and is our 3rd overall most player. He didn't do particularly well in the first ETS tournament of season 2, going 3-3, but since then he's put up 5-1 results in 2 tournaments and made top 8 both as you said, last tournament he won.
Yeah, Unearthly is he's really known as just being Rakano guy. He just always plays Rakano. He's always on the cutting edge of new Rakano technology. Everybody who plays Rakano copies his list. It's what he played the last couple weeks. It's what he played in his win that qualified him for the Invitational. At the Invitational, he actually played Stonescar Burn and did not do so well. So maybe he learned his lesson that he should just play Rakano all the time.
Well, he's Unearthly is another. What do you call him? He's a long time closed beta player. He's been playing Rakano since June is when I remember him starting to stomp around with the deck. So he knows basically every matchup inside and out, and I think that helps him a lot with player skill. But another thing is this new Righteous Rakano deck. This really is, I think, the real deal for Rakano. We've got the list in front of you here, and let's talk for a minute about this Finest Hour tech because this isn't something that people have been playing in Rakano until very recently. Righteous Fury, that's about 2 weeks ago. People have been playing that. It's the answer to Stonescar Burn, yada yada. That's old news. Let's talk about the new news. What's Finest Hour in there for?
Okay, so a very common thing that comes up with Rakano is you'll play your 2-1 or 2-2, your Oni Ronin or your Kronosh Paladin, and on turn 3 or turn 2, your opponent will answer with a bigger guy. They'll play a Seraph, they'll play an Archport Instigator, something like that. And then when you have to attack in and then torch their guy after damage, you get 2 for 1, and that sucks. If you have Finest Hour instead, you just blow them out. You get to kill their creature for 1 power and then continue developing your board and get so far ahead.
Yeah, and Finest Hour is a card that works really well with something that this deck has a lot of, which is quick draw units. It Torch also works with quick draw units, but Finest Hour allows it to do things like surprise opponents by killing off one of their blockers and then surviving the second one in a double block. It allows your units to survive Torch, acting as a pseudo protect. And one thing that Unearthly noticed is that players have stopped playing so much spot removal. With all the Stonescar burns and stuff, they've moved into playing stuff like negates or backlashes. Sorry, they've moved into playing protect, uh, reactive cards, and you know, Finest Hour does a pretty good protect impression against suffocate as well. So
Yeah, you can stop a lot of burn spells with Finest Hour.
yeah, and this Finest Hour is definitely the card that you want to see when your board is a Champion of Glory and they have a Sandstorm Titan. And just having that in your deck is a huge threat to your opponent because they need to think about it all the time. They can't guarantee that their burn spells are going to get through. They can't guarantee that their blocks are going to be safe. It puts them at a huge mental disadvantage and adds a ton to the combat math. In addition to, it also plays pretty well with Righteous Fury for combo blowouts. If you just Finest Hour Righteous Fury, you can take out opponents from up to 20 plus.
Hey, gain an extra 6 health there too.
Yeah, not bad.
I think my biggest memory of Unearthly is I used to play a lot of cockroaches back in the closed beta, and I remember every time I ran up against Unearthly, I'd just always be really sad because I knew I was probably going to get killed before I could do my sweet cockroach thing. May the cockroaches rest in peace.
Well, you probably didn't like Dark Hands very much back then. A notorious Stonescar Queen player.
All right, and another player who did very well, actually second place in the same tournament last weekend, is Elia K. So Elia K is an old hat. He's been around since closed beta. Very vocal on forums, and usually just plays whatever he thinks is the best deck. This week he played Combre aggro. He played Elysian mid range the last 2 tournaments before that. What do you think about Elia K?
Well, I mean, this guy, for whatever we may, for he's unafraid to express his opinions, and while we may not always agree with these opinions, no one can deny that this guy plays a ton of Eternal, and he plays it pretty well. He's either number 1 or 2 on ladder right now, up there battling with JPEG, who he has a lot of respect for, and they trade deck lists off a fair amount as far as I'm aware. Um, this list that we have here is JPEG's list, as we said before, and I think it's a pretty good one. It's a very low to the ground Combre deck, which I think is an interesting adaptation, especially since Elia K has always been the one saying, go over the top, you can't lose. But he's playing his favorite cards, his silences, his Combre cards, his Sandstorm Titans, and this is a deck that's going to hit you and keep hitting you until you don't get up again. It's playing Vodacon Staff to buff up any of its big guys that aren't big enough, push through. The nice Copper Hall elites, he's got all of the Aegis units to dodge removal. Awakened students. I think this is a pretty polished list. It looks like it's only playing up to 4 drops. And while that's true, it doesn't mean so much when his 4 drops end up being, 7/8s, 9/10s, these enormous things that he's playing for so cheap.
Yeah, this deck is a lot closer to my list that I wrote about a few weeks ago than it is to Moist VL's list. That was the stock Combre aggro list for a while. He's trimmed down to only one Xenon Obelisk, and he's instead playing these Vodkin staffs. He's playing District Infantry, where I had played Inspire. Uh, but he's really looking to go tall more than go wide. You just want to play a big overwhelm guy like Seraph or Copper Hall Elite, or an Aegis guy like Crown Rush Paladin, or again Copper Hall Elite. Then you stick a staff on them and you make the opponent have it. And sometimes even when they have it, you have stand together, and it doesn't matter, and they die anyways.
Yeah, I mean this deck doesn't look like it has a lot of late game, but again, its units are very big. It's got one hit wonders like Sandstorm Titan that are, they'd be pretty good even if you're playing them on turn 6. Seraph gives it good late game. The Obelisk can tick up. It's got stand together plus a couple units, and it's not like this deck's lacking in interaction. Um, Besides 4 copies of Vanquish, which I think is interesting, and I normally only tuned it to 3 copies of Vanquish at most in the main deck. It's got 2 copies of Teleport, which is a card that doesn't see that much play in most decks, but when it sees play in Combre aggro, it's usually a blowout. This is definitely a card teched against Rano, since all the weapons fall off when you bounce them back to their hand. And just as a tempo play, there isn't much else that you can get that's better than a teleport.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Teleport. It's also super good against Stonescar Burn if you just have down a unit or two and then they spend their whole turn playing some Umbran Reaper. You just teleport it back to their hand, keep on beating down like nothing ever happened. And also, especially in a deck like this where you have so many large guys, a lot of times your opponent is going to double block your 7/7 Copper Hall Elite. And when you teleport one of their blockers, so you get to kill their other blocker plus overwhelm a bunch of damage through for free, it's almost impossible for the opponent to win from that point. I highly recommend playing Teleport in your Combre aggro deck.
So in addition to all that spell-based interaction, he's still got the 8 silences that are the standard of Combre. So he's got big units, they get bigger, they come fast, and he's got interaction to handle everything. I think the deck's pretty well tuned, and it does a lot of what it's trying to do and hits a lot of really good axes for an aggro deck to play. It may not have the best card advantage or late game strategies, but again, this deck's not designed to let you get that late in the game.
Yeah, so that wraps up most of the main talking points we had. But why don't you tell us about the tournaments that are coming up? I understand there's a fancy Winter Classic coming up pretty soon.
Well, we don't have an Eternal Tournament Series tournament next weekend, which is, I know, all a shame, but that does lie on December 24th, so many people, myself included, will be having their Christmas plans there. I didn't want to force anybody to cancel them if they're seriously in the hunt for the trophy. What we do have coming up is on December 28th, we have a totally open tournament called the Eye of Winter Classic. It's a massive double elimination tournament, so lots of no big Swiss, just the players that win, they get to continue moving on. And if you lose once, you got another shot, but you lose twice, you're out. So we're going to be seeing who's the best on that particular day, and it's going to be very big. We've got, I think, 30 players registered right now, and we're still 10 days away, so a lot more will register last minute. It's going to be huge. It's going to be broadcast, and I hope to see you all either playing in it or watching it. Very exciting. Very excited for it.
Yeah, I think that we're all very excited to see how that goes.
Yeah, should be good. So I think that's all we wanted to cover for today for the tournament results. This has been our first tournament talk. We're looking forward to um, doing more of them in the future. If you guys have any suggestions for how we can improve these tournament talks, maybe other things to focus on that you think that we missed, maybe better graphics, or anything like that, don't hesitate to give us suggestions. Ace, anything that you wanted to add?
Just thanks for listening. Leave some comments if you can, and hope to see you out there in the tournaments.
All right, sounds good. Thank you all.